Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global south. Join me every weekday live on Firstpost. Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Hundreds of Palestinians flee Khan Yunis as Israel launches deadly strikes on the southern Gaza city, leaving at least 8 dead. Vladimir Putin's ally Viktor Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, makes a surprise visit to Ukraine for talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Kenyan police fired tear gas as protests against President William Ruto resume in the capital Nairobi. Activists Step Up campaign call for fresh demonstrations. Hurricane Beryl strengthens into a potentially catastrophic Category 5 storm as it moves across eastern Caribbean, putting Jamaica in its path. And 37-year-old Andy Murray withdraws from the men's singles at Wimbledon, but will play doubles with his brother in the tournament. This is Murray's last Wimbledon. Hello and welcome. We begin with Sudan. The war-torn nation continues to be on edge. Fighting between the army and the paramilitary RSF is intensifying. And now the United Nations has accused the warring sides of using starvation as a weapon. Sudan has been reeling under a deadly civil war since April 2023. After fighting erupted between forces loyal to the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the RSF, led by his former deputy Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo. Now, the conflict so far has killed tens of thousands of people, displaced millions, and has triggered one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Now, the United Nations has accused both the army and the RSF of using starvation as a weapon. It has accused them of deliberately blocking humanitarian aid. UN rights activists say humanitarian workers and local volunteers are being targeted, which has hindered the aid operations and has put millions at the risk of starvation. Now, the harvest season has also been disrupted due to the armed conflict. The organization warns that a widespread famine in Sudan is now imminent in the coming months. It says more than 25 million civilians are already being starved and are in need of humanitarian assistance. The world body has urged international donors to provide more support to humanitarian organizations that are working in Sudan. Meanwhile, the RSF has been gaining ground in key battle zones, and in the latest, it has seized a strategic town in the southeast. The paramilitary announced that it has taken over the important town of Singa, which is the capital of the Sennar state. However, the Sudanese Army denied the claims. Sennar state is the farthest the paramilitary RSF is known to have advanced in Sudan. The state is a commercial hub in the rich agricultural region of Sudan. For a week, an intense battle has been ongoing in the state as the RSF seeks to advance in the army-controlled southeast areas. This is also the state where millions have taken refuge as they fled the surrounding areas. However, after the RSF claimed to capture Singa, several videos on social media have shown people fleeing this area as well. Apart from this province, intense fighting is also ongoing in the town of Al Fasher, which is the capital of the vast North Darfur state in Western Sudan. This is the only capital city in the Darfur region that is still controlled by the Sudanese Army. After a year of fighting, RSF now controls most of the capital Khartoum, the Al Jazaira state in the center, and the Darfur region in the west, and much of the Kordofan in the south. As the conflict spreads to other areas, millions more face the risk of being killed and displaced. There are also several incidents reported of rape and looting, as negotiations between both of the parties remain at a standstill. It's the people of Sudan who continue to suffer one of the world's worst crises. And for more on this, we have with us security expert Dr. Nate Allen, who is also an associate professor of security studies at the African Centre for Strategic Studies and a research fellow at the South African Stellenbosch University. He is joining us live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Firstpost.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, the United Nations has accused both the Army and the RSF of using starvation as a weapon. This is very serious, considering one of the worst humanitarian crises that's happening globally. What are the latest details that you have for us in the escalation of this conflict?
Yeah, well, you summarized it very nicely. Currently, according to the World Food Program, that 26 million people are food insecure. 750,000 people in Sudan are on the brink of starvation. This is now the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. And the fate of much of these people are going to be determined by ongoing clashes in Al Fasher in West Darfur and in the province of Sennar. I think one key detail about Sennar, it is also the country's agricultural basket. So it's further kind of contributing to the potential instability and starvation. I'll add that as the UN has pointed out, starvation is being used as a weapon by both sides. And unfortunately, this is not a recent phenomenon. It should be recalled that both the RSF and the Sudanese Army have been complicit in atrocities in the past. Both were very close to the deposed dictator Omar al-Bashir and were very complicit in the war crimes committed under his regime. And this is very much a war being fought by two sides who are locked in a power struggle with very little regard for the people they may govern in the aftermath.
Right, Doctor, I do want to get to that, but how can the accountability be ensured given the history of the violations by both forces?
I mean, it's difficult, right? The RSF was accused of ethnic cleansing when it was the Janjaweed militia back in the early 2000s in Darfur, and clearly many of its leaders and those responsible escaped accountability. Currently, the International Criminal Court has said it is investigating potentially new war crimes being committed in Darfur, but these investigations take time. If you have to ask me, the best way to stop the ongoing and future suffering is going to be through some kind of ceasefire and by working with the conflicting parties to provide much needed humanitarian aid and access. Ideally, you would see some kind of locally led peace operation.
Right. The United Nations also said that foreign powers are aiding either of these two sides, and these are complicit in the war crimes. Now, there have been reports that Iran has been supplying drones to the Sudanese army and the UAE to the paramilitary. Now, Sudan even confronted the UAE at the UN Security Council. Can the world body take any action against those complicit in Sudan's civil war?
It absolutely could. I mean, the UN could potentially sanction those responsible for enabling both armed forces and the RSF committing war crimes. The ICC could also charge or threaten to charge those complicit in providing weapons to the two sides committing war crimes. I would imagine, or I would hope that such a threat could be brought to the table if the deal isn't reached, or at the very least, there's a pause in the fighting. But a key question is will they? Will the warring parties, the UAE or Iran, accept a ceasefire with the threat of sanctions or war crimes being held over their heads? That, in my view, is the million-dollar question.
Absolutely. Doctor, thank you very much for being with us on the show and for all your valued insights on the latest in Sudan.
Thank you. My pleasure.
From Sudan, let's now shift focus to the Democratic Republic of Congo. The nation has been in a grip of a decades-long armed conflict. The fighting is flaring between the Congolese Army and the M23 Rebels. The rebels are advancing in the eastern part of the country. They are seizing strategic towns in the area. On Sunday, the militia group gained control of the town in Kirumba in North Kivu province. Kirumba is the biggest town in the Lubero territory, a big commercial center with more than 120,000 residents. Now, on Saturday as well, the M23 rebels captured the strategic town of Kanyabayonga in Lubero territory. 5 people, including 3 civilians, were killed. The town is considered a pathway to other major commercial centers in the north, where the rebels are reportedly seeking to advance. So far, the rebels have entered into 4 territories in the North Kivu province. This is Rutshuru, Congo, and Masisi, and now also Leboro. Now, the M23, or the March 23 rebel military group, is made up of ethnic Tutsis that broke away from the Congolese army in 2012. The group is fighting to defend Tutsi interests against the Hutus. The Democratic Republic of Congo has accused neighboring Rwanda of backing the rebel group. However, it has denied the allegations. Many experts believe that Rwanda has provided M23 rebels with military support and that the group is also being backed by Uganda. While a peace agreement was signed between the M23 rebels and the Congolese army in 2013, the group has rebooted its campaign since 2021. It has been able to seize large swathes of territory in the east, and its advances in North Kivu province have only added to the suspicions that it is being backed by other nations. The Congolese army and United Nations peacekeepers have been struggling to contain advances by the M23, and the civilians have borne the brunt of the violence. Thousands have been killed in attacks. The security situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo is complex. Now, apart from the M23, several other armed groups remain active. Millions have been internally displaced. With the renewed fighting, the North Kivu province is now one of the worst affected. Now we shift focus to Nigeria. The West African nation is witnessing its worst economic crisis in a generation. People in Nigeria, which is Africa's most populous country, have been burdened by surging prices of food, fuel, and medicine. The skyrocketing costs have made essential items out of reach for many. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu has been facing heavy criticism for his economic reforms that people say deepened the trouble for them. And the government is borrowing more money to tackle this mounting crisis, but its priorities seem to be misplaced. Nigeria is on an airport building spree. Just last month, Zamfara, one of Nigeria's poorest states, held a ceremony to mark the beginning of construction of an international airport in the capital of Gusau. Now, typically, airports coming up in cities is a sign of economic and commercial development. But a key element is missing at many of these airports across Nigeria: the passengers. Nigeria already has 33 airports, and new ones have been springing up across the country in recent years. Out of these 33, all but 2 are entirely owned by federal or state governments. Now, there are also 13 airstrips, 4 military fields, and 128 sites with helipads. Now, this growth in aviation projects in Nigeria is starkly at odds with air passenger traffic. Just 3 out of these 33 airports accounted for 92% of all passenger journeys in 2022. As the number of airports increases, the number of passengers is diminishing. The number of journeys taken by air fell last year to 15.8 million, which was down from 16.1 million in 2022. In some regions, state governments have opened airports but are struggling to maintain them. Last year, the Ebonyi state spent around $24 million to build an airport. Months later, an additional $9 million was spent on repairing its barely used runway. In May this year, the federal government was forced to take over the facility. The Tinubu government defends these projects as social amenities for the people. But in reality, people of Nigeria are struggling to cope with the surging airfare. The fares have doubled in the past 3 years, and they are topped with multiple taxes and high service charges by government agencies. Both the Lagos and Abuja airports have a $100 per passenger service charge. This is one of the most expensive globally. Some analysts say that the rush to build airports is less about economic growth and more about political prestige. For President Bola Tinubu, it is both prestige and passion. He is one of the flying presidents of Africa. The Nigerian president has faced severe criticism over his frequent trips abroad. His alleged penchant for air travel is a contrast to the tough economic conditions at home. Slamming Tinubu, the opposition says that Nigeria does not need a tourist-in-chief. In the first 6 months of his presidency, Tinubu reportedly spent at least $2.2 million on domestic and foreign travel, 36% more than the budgeted amount for 2023. The Nigerian presidency has said that the trips are important for attracting foreign investment. But since aviation, airports and travel seem to be an area of interest for President Tinubu. Can he manage to turn Nigeria's ghost airports into fully functional centers of economic growth? And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid reports of coups and crises that dominate the headlines from the continent, we get you positive stories that often get overlooked. As climate change continues to wreak havoc on traditional agricultural practices, communities across Kenya are finding new ways to sustain their livelihoods. Amid prolonged droughts and unpredictable weather patterns, beekeeping has emerged as a vital alternative for many. Now, Maasai people of Kenya, particularly in the Kajiado County, are turning to beekeeping to adapt to the changing climate and to secure their future. Our final report gets you all the details.
Climate change is no longer a distant threat, but a pressing reality. It's impacting communities globally. From extreme weather patterns to rising sea levels, the consequences of climate change are becoming more evident each day. In Kenya, the effects of climate change are particularly severe. Prolonged droughts, unpredictable rainfall, and extreme weather events have wreaked havoc in the country. This is especially so on agriculture, which is the backbone of the nation's economy. Smallholder farmers, who rely heavily on consistent climate conditions, are among the hardest hit. The erratic weather has led to crop failures, water scarcity and food insecurity, and it has pushed many communities to the brink of crisis. As the effects of climate change become more pronounced, people are now finding innovative ways to adapt. In Kenya's Kajiado County, one such strategy is beekeeping. The Maasai tribe there says beekeeping has emerged as a sustainable and profitable alternative to traditional farming methods.
The drought came in 2017, killing our cattle. That's why we started to beekeeping.
The Nasinya Oman Women Group, a group of local women, are learning this new skill. It's become a lifeline for them after the devastating droughts that have hit East Africa for the past few years.
We started as a group of 7, now we are 24 women with almost 100 children, and it helps us not be idle.
Alafu inatusaidia kama sisi wa mama.
Dressed in their bee suits, they head to the hives every day. Residents say beekeeping gives them quicker returns than cows or goats, where they have to wait at least 1 year to sell the newborns.
Ni rahisi sana kukamua.
Milking cows is easy, but the challenge is preservation. Bees are more challenging to harvest, but the remuneration is quicker compared to cattle.
But kupata pesa yao ni rahisi.
Julius Yere, the local community leader, inspects the hives carefully as they have become the community's livelihood.
We are educating women because they used to sell milk, and with the number of cattle going down, there is no milk to sell. They do not have an alternative.
Despite having found an alternative source of income, they still care for their cattle. Climate change is threatening their way of life, and they are finding their own way to adapt. While climate change presents formidable challenges, it also offers opportunities for innovative solutions like beekeeping. And as communities continue to adapt, it's crucial for global efforts to support these initiatives, ensuring a sustainable future for everyone.
Now we have come to the end of our product.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin